welcome to tonight's session where we are hopefully going to take you through our current special rate variation. My name's Scott Phillips. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at Northern Beaches Council. Welcoming everybody here this evening. Start by acknowledging the First Nations people and the land in which we are meeting upon, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal people who are joining us online this evening. Folks, what we would like to take you through over the next hour or so is a quick overview on the special rate variation community consultation that we have with you. We have out in public tonight. Northern Beaches Council, as you I'm sure are aware, provides a diverse range of services and infrastructure for more than 260,000 residents across 254 square kilometres, making Northern Beaches Council the fourth largest by population in New South Wales. And here at Council, we manage over $3.9 billion in infrastructure, including 6 libraries, 9 children's centres, 2 aquatic centres, 21 surf clubs, 36 community centres, over 68 toilet amenities building blocks for the public, 122 sports fields, 15 ocean rock pools, and 219 playgrounds. And hopefully you are all enjoying and use many of those services. We provide weekly household waste services to over 100,000 properties. We protect over 600 kilometres of stormwater assets, patrol 21 of the 24 beaches along the over 80 kilometres of coastline. We have over 840 kilometres of local roads, 32 wharves and jetties, and almost 13 a value of over $2.5 billion. And an additional $175 million of plant and equipment and other assets. As you can clearly, we have a large, diverse range of services across the LGA. Folks, the operating expenditure across 16 key services is up in front of you there in that pie graph. The cost to run council is over $425 million this year, and our biggest operation, which you may not be surprised about, is in waste services. So over 26% of our operating expenditure is attributable directly to waste, which includes our Kimbriki landfill service. That's followed by our 4 largest infrastructure-driven services in transport, property and parks, and environmental sustainability, which together includes an additional 42% of our entire expenditure. As I said, that goes towards the management of our $3.9 billion in infrastructure assets. Important to know that not all of our infrastructure is managed by or funded by rates. And this next graph that you have in front of you, this bar graph, illustrates some of that. So the pink bar indicates rates funding. So across different service areas. So the top line, you'll see that in our waste and cleansing area, a small portion of that expenditure is through rates. The majority of our expenditure comes from income from our waste and stormwater charges. Perhaps going down to the very bottom of the that bar graph, you'll see in children's services there in the dark green graph, the entirety of children's services is comes from income, which is fees and charges, or in the case of children's services, a self-funded service. So approximately 44% of our revenue comes from rates, the remainder coming from those other sources. With that, I might just hand over to Council's Chief Operating Officer, Kelly Loveridge, now, just to take you through some of those income sources and the current proposal we have for a special variation. Thank you, Kelly.
So here's the income and some of those sources that Scott just mentioned. So rates fund about 44% of our council services at just under $197 million. So this brightly coloured donut illustrates the various sources of income that come through and fund our council. So the green and orange slices of the chart make up income from user charges and fees and other income. And this is generally money that's raised through the different services that council offers across the LGA for fees such as the Lakeside Holiday Park, childcare or community centres, parking stations, our aquatic centres, things like that. And at $104 million, this is 23% of our income. Then we've got about 12% of our income comes from grants and contributions that council is given, particularly developer contributions and grants through state and federal government. 5% of our income comes through Kimbriki and is used to manage and operate that Kimbriki waste facility that we have. And council also receives income from investments. The majority of our income comes through ratepayers, through the rate section, as we said, and annual charges. You can see that's 58% of our income on this slide. Annual charges, just for reference, are for stormwater and waste services. So the part we're talking about today is the blue part, just the rates, which is 54% of our income, as I mentioned. So if you have a look here at your rates notice, it may be something you haven't particularly looked at in detail before, but we just wanted to clarify the various components. So as I just touched on, there's a waste surcharge for everybody, which is $586 per year. And that covers the cost of your household waste and recycling service. We've also got a stormwater charge, which if you're in a house is $25. And then we've got the rates we talk about. So the amount that you would pay depends on your land value compared to other properties in the Northern Beaches. The minimum, as you can see there in that red marked box, is $1,100. And about a third of our residents in the Northern Beaches pay this figure. Then, as you can see, we've got the medium at $1,394. And that's based on the middle. So the middle person, if all the people or all the properties across the Northern Beaches were lined up, the very middle, with a residential land value of $1.34 million. And then we have the average, which comes out higher. It's based on the average, the rates income directly divided by how many properties are, and reflects some of the higher land value properties that we have in our area. So this red section is what we're talking about as a potential increase to rates. So the rates that we get are based on that land value, as I touched on before, and that land value is set by the New South Wales Valuer General's Office. So how that works is the rates are basically local taxes, and that comes off that land value every 3 years. So the change in the property value doesn't actually change the amount of rates that council gets overall. We can only get one fixed amount at a pool value, and that is related to the rate peg. Now, a rate peg is a figure that the state government, IPART, set each year. And that's the most that any council in New South Wales can lift their rates by. So our rate pool can't go up by more than that. And individuals' rates may vary, though, when the land value varies, which is determined by the Valuer General. What we're talking to you about through this process is a special approval process that IPART has put in place where councils need to or wish to increase rates above what that rate peg is. So councils can apply to them for a special increase, a special variation on those rates, which can be from a single year all the way up to 7 years. If you've seen some of the material, and if not, we'll go through it tonight, our proposals are suggesting a staged or staggered approach over 3 years rather than in one hit. Okay, so what we'd like to give a bit more clarification on, and hopefully this reflects where we've had some of the questions as well, are what are the budget challenges in terms of why we're at this position where Northern Beaches needs to seek or is asking the community to talk about seeking this special variation to rates. So what we're looking up here is an income and operating expenditure chart. So we don't want to get overly complicated, but I want to talk through the general high-level outcome of what this suggests to it when you look at it. So the green line refers to the income council receives, and the red line is talking about our operating expenses to deliver the services that we do for our community. We need the income to consistently be above the operating expenses to be sustainable. You can see during COVID, that was a huge difficulty for us, as it was for a lot of people right across the country. You can see that the green line, the income, went a little higher than expenses for a couple of years after COVID. And that's basically due to the subsidies and government reliefs that came through for people after that peak. But again, it's temporary now. And as you see in our current year, we're sitting at a deficit where our expenses are higher. And even into the future, we never get a gap between the green line being above, having more income than what we need. So to be sustainable, we need that surplus there because these are only our operating expenses. This doesn't cover any events such as natural disasters or storms. It doesn't cover loan repayments. It doesn't cover any new or upgraded assets. So by that, I mean buildings, roads, footpaths that the community or our councillors might want. It is only working on the existing conditions. It's obviously been a challenge for us incredibly, and when I say us, I'm talking about the sector in terms of local government, trying to balance all the services that we do with the community compared to inflation, which has been placing a huge pressure on costs for everybody, as you would know as well. And our main income source, rates, that we saw in that donut table before, is not keeping pace with it to the cost that we're actually experiencing. On the next slide, what I'm showing you here is a bit more clarity on why the rate peg is actually impacting councils. So if you can see the dotted line on the bottom, that refers to the rate peg that the government set, that IPART set each year as the maximum increase on income. But you can see a whole series of other coloured lines above that, where other things have increased at a higher percentage than the money or income we receive. So a key point of interest for us is the green line, so the producer price index for roads and bridges. As you can imagine, a lot of our work and expense is around maintaining our infrastructure. So that area, the cost to us to maintain our roads and do this infrastructure works has increased, for example, for 23-24 at 5.4%, the cost that it incurred for us to deliver the works. However, the income didn't keep up with it at 3.7%. You can see the CPI is higher as well across all these years in the past. You can see, just for reference, the purple line is the award that the local government state award requires for all staff. You can see the producer price index for buildings. The pink line is incredibly high, and if you've had any touch point with construction or perhaps renovation on your house, you would certainly understand how much the costs have increased significantly over the years. So things are costing us a lot more than the income we receive each year. It's not sustainable to be in this path, because what's happening now is we're not undertaking the works and delivering things in full, the maintenance of the assets, because we don't have sufficient funds to do so. So our assets are deteriorating. Here's another way of looking at the information too, trying to make this as clear as we can. And you can certainly recognise how inflation impacts you personally when you see the rates. So over the last 4 years, the teal colour or green colour is what infrastructure costs have done. So the way they have increased cumulative, 23.7% increase in the last 4 years. The yellow boxes represent the rate peg that councils have been able to charge for income. So you can see the red highlighted area for Northern Beaches represents $24 million gap between the rates we receive and the costs that we're actually incurring in delivering projects and works and services. In addition to that, there's other cost impacts as well. So we touched on before the impact of COVID, about $41 million for Northern Beaches Council in terms of the revenue lost and the support costs we provided for the community through that. You will also recognise that we are very prone in this amazing coastal location to storm events and natural disasters, and we've had a number of them in the last few years as well. And we also, which is something you might not be aware of, have an emergency services levy as a part of the rates. And that is actually a cost that goes straight back to the government as well. And that just in 1 year alone has increased by $3 million. So all these costs combined start to reflect the picture of how council doesn't have the income to actually meet these costs and deliver all our services into the future currently. Now, we mentioned IPART before as the group that set the rate peg. They did a review of the rate peg methodology after a lot of advocating from councils across the state, talking about how the money received through rate pegs was not sufficient to reflect the needs of their communities and to reflect managing and maintaining assets and facilities. So IPART in that review acknowledged that there were issues with the methodology. They understood it had a negative impact on the financial viability of councils. They understand that it didn't work in volatile economic climates. There was a lot of lag in the way they consider costs. And they have acknowledged that through the special variations process, councils can try to adjust due to past inflationary impacts, which is exactly what we're talking about here. This red gap, even if rate pegs from now on were to exactly match inflation, which they don't, even if they were, every single year, this $24 million gap would exist in council's income. Now, switching to the assets, and by that I mean the roads, the footpaths, the parks, the stormwater systems around you and around us in the community, there's big challenges there because our asset management plans tell us how much money we need to spend to keep looking after our assets. And when we don't have the money each year, they deteriorate further. And you might recognise something in your own community where you've seen that with an asset. Now, assets are managed in a system of scale of quality from 1, very good, through to 5, very poor. Now, we consider that condition 4, poor, and condition 5, very poor, are not acceptable for the community and are not appropriate. And local government needs to work to move those low quality assets back to at least a condition 3, standard, satisfactory. So this graph shows us that we would need to spend just over $46 million to bring all those poor condition assets back to at least satisfactory. And in fact, we know and community expect that assets are brought back to a very poor condition. You may see sometimes where there's a footpath and there's been some grading out or there's some temporary asphalt works put in to remove a hazard or a trip hazard, for example. That may be satisfactory by asset management standards, but a community member might certainly expect that the footpath is replaced with full new concrete. To actually do the full renewals, this figure you can see in the red box moves up to $108 million that Northern Beaches would need to be able to bring all our assets back to a very good condition. Where this also keeps us with these costs is just about the backlog, so where you see assets deteriorating. The financial challenges we also have is that where these assets need to be upgraded further, or for example, an old toilet block now considers and has additional change facilities or additional accessibility components, new and upgraded projects that require significant money require additional cost above this. And we would need to fund additional money or have additional money made available if the community were looking to see these new and upgraded projects beyond our existing assets. What I've got putting up on the screen now is just a little bit of context. I've mentioned local government a few times, and that's because it's really important to highlight that this is a matter for all local governments across New South Wales with the rate peg system. This isn't an issue in particular with Northern Beaches. So you can see just a little snip there as an example. There's been a number of articles lately, you might have seen them, where councils across the state are trying to consider how to manage with insufficient funds. So some are turning to reducing services or hours of operation or closing facilities. And I think this article was around having to potentially close a pool because they couldn't fund the maintenance and asset to keep it running, let alone the operational costs. What I'm also highlighting here with the Sydney Water logo as well is that Sydney Water, have, not dissimilar to councils, have a process with IPART. And they have put an application in this year too for an 18% price rise next year, and then increasing costs in the years after that, as have it Australia Post as another example of a service. The other thing to highlight here is cost shifting, which you might see in newspaper articles from time to time, but not be quite clear on that. So there's been reports done that talk about where state or federal government push a service that is at that level through to local government level, and local government now need to fund or deliver that service. So I mentioned before the emergency service levy, which is an example for that. And there's other levies and costs as well that have come from the government that councils, and not just Northern Beaches, but councils need to absorb and take on in their income each year. So it's additional expenditure without any further income to pay for it. As an example, in a study that was undertaken, there is approximately $460 within every ratepayer's notice across New South Wales as an average that relates to cost shifting. For Northern Beaches in particular, that's $379 of the average rate notice relates to cost shifting things, where the cash goes back to the government through a levy, or the money is to provide a service that the state government have pushed onto councils to try and deliver. So that represents about a third of the average rate value cost when we talked about that $1,100 before. Where I'd like to move to now is another reflective of the questions we've got, and something we obviously want to be able to talk to the community about and demonstrate. And that's where council has saved money, and the amount of savings and efficiencies we've had over a number of years since the amalgamation. So we have saved literally millions of dollars over time, and that's been in efforts to reduce both the costs of the things we're doing, but improve productivity to ensure that we can tell the community members that we are an efficient and effective council delivering the services that you would like. So these initiatives have assisted us over time to date in trying to deliver those budget balances each year, but they're not enough to support financial security long term, or to be able to deliver on that backlog of assets that we mentioned before, or any new or upgrade projects that we're hearing from the community want to be delivered. So we continue to focus on cost savings through workplace reform, service reviews, property opportunities, energy saving initiatives, and productivity. And it's important to note that we were working through at the moment, as you can see on the next slide, a report that demonstrates that. So part of council's submission to IPART, should the councillors determine to submit an application, is to demonstrate the productivity journey and the improvements that have been made over the time with real world savings, and discussing where they have been reinvested and where that money has delivered. Importantly, there's been a lot of savings made in a number of areas, and I won't read them all out for you, but some key areas is there was $90 million worth of debt across the three councils at the point of amalgamation. Now, Northern Beaches has paid back 81 million of that 90 million in the last few years, whilst at the same time delivering a capital works program that is 20% larger than the three councils provided before. So the only way we've been able to pay off those additional loans and deliver more works and services is because we've had a lot of savings internally whilst holding back against that rate peg. But as I said, it's not able to continue into the future because we're sitting in that deficit. Now, for reference, that productivity journey and improvement plan is available on the Your Say page, and it was also tabled to council last night at the council meeting, so it's available through the website, and I'll talk a little more about some of the documentation you can see a bit later on. What I'd like to just touch on now is the options. Now, you might have seen these through the letters or the various materials or the website, but we'll just give a bit more of an understanding of each. And there's 4 options proposed when you look at the materials. Here's a high-level summary of them. So option 1 is really a base case. So what it is saying is if we only keep with the rate peg, what does that mean? Whereas options 2, 3 and 4 are proposing an increase above the rate peg to various degrees with different deliverables as a result of that money coming in from the different options. And I'll touch base on each of them individually. So as I said, option 1 is if we don't do anything and only the rate peg, increase goes through, then the reality is that Northern Beaches would need to look at reducing services. We can't continue to deliver everything we do at the moment without an increase to the income we have. So the problem with that is that our council assets will continue to deteriorate, and it's only a short-term stopgap solution. There can be no new projects, no upgraded works. We have no ability to respond or to cover costs associated with any storms or other environmental things that might happen. And it's also unsustainable because after 1 year, we will still be in the same position. The long-term financial plan can't be recovered without an input through additional income and rates. And so the longer that council goes without this increase, then the exponential growth in the asset deterioration, that backlog we talked about before, will get larger and larger and mean that a variation in a later year would have to cost a lot more. What I do have in the corner for reference, so you can compare against each of the options, is what the percentage is each year. So in year 1, under the rate peg, it is 3.8%. IPART have made that announcement. And so that is equivalent in the average residential rates to be a weekly increase of $1.24. This is not sustainable for council in the long term, but it is a base case of what would happen without intervention. For option 2, this is about maintaining our services. So in addition to the rate peg, it is proposing a 6% increase each year for 3 years. So in that first year, the average weekly increase would be $3.19 for people in option 2 model. This is about maintaining existing services and try to address that asset backlog that we spoke about before, trying to build back to at least a satisfactory level. There isn't the ability for flash new projects or large-scale developments. It's a very modest response that would just keep us ticking over. As an example, just very briefly, it's not specific to a site, but the concept of an amenities block or a toilet block. In this scenario, we can repair faulty things, we can repaint, but that's happening. There's nothing else happening to that structure or no additional amenity value that is able to be added in this scenario. When we look at option 3, and for clarity, option 3 and 4 both build on what's included in option 2. So this option proposes an 8.3% increase each year for 2 years, and then an 8.4% increase in the 3rd year. So in addition to those things of delivering the existing services we said in option 2, it also helps us address the asset renewal and maintenance gap to a better degree. It provides some support and some buffer where we talked about the natural risk reduction programs to support us in this coastal environment. And it gives the opportunity to, in the future, be able to deliver some of those larger renewal projects, big upgrades or changes to the scale of something like, for example, an aquatic centre renewal or a large-scale project that can't be funded under existing funding otherwise. It would not be possible with another option. And finally, we have option 4, which is the increase services option. So as I said, this builds again on what option 3 included and is a 10% increase each year for 3 years over and above that rate peg. So in year 1, that's 13.8% increase, or what that equates to is $4.49 in the residential average rates increase on a weekly basis. What we can do in addition to options 2 and 3 is to build up the major renewal fund. So there is opportunities to deliver larger scale projects, whether it be a large facility or a large building, and improving and upgrading facilities, for example, female-friendly facilities, additional change rooms, accessibility improvements. So as opposed to the pictures on the last couple of slides that were a gradual improvement on what might be an existing facility, this would allow new facilities or large-scale facilities to come into play, as well as large projects like town centre improvements. So this option, in terms of the 3 years, would provide approximately $29 million more than option 2 of just maintaining services. And that's how the larger projects can be delivered in time. What I'll touch on more is the broader engagement process that's underway at the moment. And if you're not already aware, then I want to just make those links available to you. So our Your Say project page is a really excellent source of information. There's a lot of information there, from digestible 1-minute videos that give you a snapshot of circumstance or a one-pager if you've only got 5 minutes, through to detailed pages about all the options and how it will work for you. We've obviously got things like tonight's information session and all our drop-in sessions across the wards on there so people can be made aware. And there's the opportunity to provide feedback through a survey form there, as well as a wealth of information. That site is also where you can see the productivity and improvement plan that I referred to earlier, and a number of other related documents. What is also really useful on that website is an online rates calculator tool that we developed. So we've seen over the last few weeks that this has been really popular with our community, because you can understand exactly what each of the options would mean for you on your specific property. So you can put your address in and it tells you all the numbers for each of the options. So we've seen that that's been very popular for people to access and use. And when we've been talking to people at drop-in sessions, there's also been good sentiment to understand that that's available, because of course everybody is thinking about what does it mean for me. And this is the really clear way to see it. And then there's the opportunity on that page to have your say and provide any feedback that you would like to do. What I'll just touch on now, before we move to some responses and answers to questions, is the next steps on the process, which I've mentioned a couple of times, but for clarity, here's the next few months spelled out. So in November, councillors resolved to go to the community and talk to the community about our financial situation and our sustainability into the future. So that's the process at the moment, where we're engaging and trying to make the community aware of what the options are, what the circumstances are at the moment. So that'll carry right through. That started on the 18th of November. That'll carry right through till after Christmas, when that period closes. And the reason for these dates is because IPART have a fixed submission date in February. So all councils across New South Wales, anyone working through this process, has to fit that same time frame. So in January, we will review and compile the survey responses and the feedback that's been given to us through these different forums. And a report will be tabled to council. So when an update report on this process was given to council last night, they resolved to hold an extraordinary council meeting on the 28th of January. Now, that might be a strange term for those that aren't used to local government, but basically what that means is when you can't do things in the ordinary scheduled meeting timeframes, which in our case at the start of the year would be February, then they need to hold an extraordinary meeting. So they've resolved to do that on the 28th of January, which is the very last Tuesday before IPART would require a submission if that's what they decide to do. So at that meeting, councillors will look at the feedback and the report that council's provided, and on the information and financial analysis and that productivity and improvement plan, and consider whether council should proceed with an application to IPART, and if they are of a mind to proceed, which option they would be submitting to IPART. If they make a decision to proceed, council staff would then have that application submitted by the 3rd of February, the following Monday. Now, what IPART do is they do their own analysis. They look at the data that's been submitted. They look at the community consultation process. They consider the various reports that we would need to provide, and that includes not just the productivity and improvements where we're committing to additional savings, but also a capacity to pay report that talks about our specific community in the Northern Beaches and what the rate increase would be in terms of any impact. They consider that information, and IPART also again do their own community consultation. So that would be happening in March, April, that they would go and talk to the community in Northern Beaches again as part of their assessment. IPART would then advise of whether us and any other council submitting would be going through and have approved a variation to their rates, and that's probably in late May. So what that means then is when we take a budget to council in June, like we do each year, it would include the outcomes of that IPART decision and resolving to proceed with whichever increase that IPART have given us. And then the following financial year, so from 1 July, is when the rate increase would take effect. So that is the timeframes. In terms of the IPART deadline, that is for all councils. So the other councils that we know are submitting, and we've seen in newspapers there's a number of councils this year, would all be on this same time frame and would all be trying to work through with the community at this point in time. What I might do from here is move to some questions. So we've received a lot of questions, and what we will try to do is work through as many responses and answers as we can now, and those that we can't get to, we will make available through our FAQ, our frequently asked questions page, and we'll be contacting all registered people to let you know the direct link to that, or of course you can go straight into the page, and we'll be continuing to update that frequently asked questions to reflect what we're hearing from our community at the various forums and discussions. So it's a live page with updates as a good source of information. What I'll do now is I'll refer you to Campbell Pfeiffer, our Director of Assets, and he will talk to you through some of these responses and the themes that we've seen today. So thank you, Campbell.
Thanks, Kelly. And yes, I'll just reiterate what Kelly has said. We've received over 60 questions. Some of them are niche questions, and some of them we've tried to bundle up so that we can answer them all at once. It will be, in some cases, a little bit repetitive because I'll refer to what Kelly has talked about and what Scott has talked about, but I'll try and get through as many questions as possible. So the first question was, can we please have some additional financial detail on each option? And I'm going to refer to this in answer to a number of questions tonight. But yes, you can. It's on our Your Say page. So if you go to the Your Say page associated with our special variation consultation, there is a draft long-term financial plan, and that documents more of the information around each option. There are a range of questions around what happened to the amalgamation benefits and savings. That information is contained once again on the Your Say site under Council's Productivity Journey and Improvement Plan, which Kelly referred to. What I would pull out from that is the New South Wales State Government estimated that there would be savings from the amalgamation of the three councils to the value of about $76 million. In 2019-2020, there was an analysis of the benefit of what had occurred from amalgamation, and that benefit was more than double. It was $160 million. You can read more about that. The question is, where did those funds go? They went back into services. They went back into paying down debt. They went into improving capital works on the northern beaches. There was a question about beach parking stickers. Will this impact our beach parking stickers? The answer is no. Every ratepayer gets 2 beach parking stickers. That won't change as part of this. There was a question around how does council currently spend the community's money? Now, Kelly and Scott have given you a high level on how that is done, but there's a significant amount of information available on our Your Safe page in the documents section. Our delivery program includes information about all of our costs by services and also our costs by type of expense, and you can look at that. There is also audited financial statements that are available on Council's website for the last number of financial years. The next question was, how long has Council had a deficit budget? As per the presentation, we've been running a deficit budget. It's this year, and we're forecasting deficit budgets for the next coming years. I would say that the intention to seek further funding in terms of a special variation and the need for it has been put in the last 2 annual budgets. So if you go back and have a look at Council's last 2 annual budgets, it's been identified that there has been a need for the last 2 years. There were a few questions on what about the impact on people on a fixed income. So Council does appreciate the rising cost of living and is really only pursuing the special variation because it's essential for the financial sustainability of Council. For ratepayers who have concerns with paying their rates now or into the future, we do have avenues for assistance, and whether that be deferring payment, and that's through Council's hardship clauses, and anyone can apply for that at any time. There are a number of questions about why can't Council live within its means? Why can't it just continue on with the funding that it currently has? That's option 1. As Kelly said, that is the direction where you sit with the rate peg, and this will require reductions in services. There was a question about the Narrabeen Athletics track. I will say that's not a Council service. I know New South Wales Government is looking at replacing the Narrabeen Athletics track, but that is not a Council service. There are a number of questions around why doesn't Council increase fees or increase charges, including DA rates? Now, a number of the fees and charges that Council is able to charge are actually set and they're regulated. But Council does have an adopted pricing methodology that is available to everyone. We publicise that each year. It's in our fees and charges booklet, and it goes from 0 to cost recovery to full commercial return. And it's really based on the user. Those are adjusted each year. And while we think we've got it right, there's always opportunities to improve. But I would say that that's available in public for anyone to look at what our fees and charges are. There are about 6 questions on our rating methodology and how the rating methodology works. Now, Kelly went through the rating methodology and the constraints on Council and noted that for many years that rate peg has been significantly lower than the inflation rate, which has caused the strain on local governments and caused strain on the whole sector. Both the federal government and the state government are aware that the funding of local government is not currently sustainable. Both have inquiries underway. The New South Wales Parliamentary inquiry into the ability of councils to fund infrastructure and services has just handed down its findings. It's available on the New South Wales Government site. It made 17 recommendations, which included things like allowing councils to set a better rating system, advocating for greater federal funding, talking about the reduction of cost shifting, which is what Kelly talked a little bit before about, dedicated funding sources for responding to disaster, because that does impact local governments significantly, changes to the developer contributions framework, changes to grant models and other items. So that is available and is currently in front of the state government. They are going to respond to that within the next 3 months. There were about 20 questions that were raised in various forms around savings and efficiencies. And what about savings and efficiencies? Kelly has raised that, that matter earlier in the presentation. I would say there is a very comprehensive document on the Your Say page. The document which talks about the journey that Council's undertaken from a productivity point of view. Council has and will continue to look for efficiencies. This is a matter of normal practice within Council, and it's also a requirement from IPART for any councils seeking a special variation to put forward what is going to occur in the future. So that is available on our Your Say site. There was a question on the timing of the process. As was noted, Council is not in control of the timing of applying for a special variation. We're required to make a submission by the 3rd of February should we wish to progress with this matter. That necessarily means that the Council has to have resolved on that before, which means January, which means councils, and not just Northern Beaches Council, but all councils are engaging on this now. It's absolutely acknowledged that it is not the best time to engage on any matter leading up to Christmas, but it is the timing that we have to meet for the process. There was a question on what was the impact of COVID-19 on Council's budget. That is also documented on our Your Say page. COVID-19 significantly impacted federal, state and local government budgets. And Northern Beaches Council, like a lot of other local governments, supported local businesses and supported their local community to quite an extent. And that cost $41 million in the case of Northern Beaches Council. There was a question about which option supports the redevelopment of the Warringah Aquatic Centre. That option would be option 3 or option 4. What I would say to that, though, is ultimately the decision on which projects get funded is a matter for the elected council. What a special variation does is provide the capacity to fund projects, and then what projects get funded is a matter for council. There was a question around what is the size of the maintenance backlog, and once again, I would refer you to the Your Say page. There's a really comprehensive asset management plan on the Your Say page and the link, and it was included in this presentation. The unfunded asset gap currently displayed in that asset management plan is about $255 million over 10 years, of which maintenance and renewal unfunded gap is about $151 million over 10 years. That is broken down per asset type and also into categories in the asset management plan. So I would recommend that you please go on and read that plan. Next question was by a number of people. In option 1, what services will be cut? It's a really good question. No decision has been made as yet as to what services would be cut. That would be a matter for council should they choose to progress with option 1, whether it is less maintenance, whether it's reducing services or closing facilities for periods of time or fully. That would be a matter for council. There were a number of questions around, can we have a different option? Can we do it a different way? The answer to that is, unfortunately, no, we cannot. IPART has a very set process. You must engage and discuss with the community an option that you are going to progress with. So you cannot propose a number of options and then progress with a different option. You must progress with an option that you've engaged with. There was a question around the development of Ingleside and whether or not that would provide some financial benefit that could offset some of the costs for the special variation. The development of Ingleside is not progressing. That was halted in 2022 by the Department of Planning and Environment. And the last question, last theme of questions was one around benchmarking performance and operational performance, and whether or not council does that. Council does do benchmarking of our performance, and we prepare an annual benchmarking report for the Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee every year. This looks at financial, operational and workforce measures. And the last report to AREC was in the last year, and it indicates that council remains on par with its industry peers. So that's the themes of the questions. I might hand back now to Scott to finalise the matter.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell, and thanks, Kelly, for those detailed presentations. And folks, thanks for staying with us for the entire hour. As I'm sure you will appreciate from that, this is a matter that we have considered very carefully. It is a very detailed proposal and has a number of complexities attached to that. That's not to say that there aren't very real questions from the community, and it is our role to be available to respond to those questions for you. As Kelly indicated earlier, we will post additional questions and answers on our website as part of the engagement process. That's an ongoing update, and I'll encourage you to reach out there. Also, encourage you to speak to your ward councillors about the current notification process. Your ward councillors, of course, have been highly engaged in this process and are interested in everybody's views. So they are readily available. Their contact details are readily available on our website as well. All right, I'm just mindful of time. We have gone a little bit over. Thank you again for sticking with us, and we'll look forward to continuing the engagement with you and welcome all of your feedback. In the meantime, have a wonderful evening.